While President Trump spoke this morning at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and sought to make his case for what he sees as economic success for the U.S., his foreign policy forays are overshadowing that message, including his planned establishment of a board of peace that would appear to rival the United Nations, but with Trump firmly in charge for life. To discuss those foreign policy moves, the economy, and other developments in our regular Wednesday political roundup, we are joined today by Mark Jones, political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and Jeronimo Cortina, professor of political science at the University of Houston and co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Craig.
President Trump continues to threaten to raise tariffs on European nations and NATO countries that oppose his effort to purchase Greenland. So let's start there. Again, a reminder, Greenland is an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark and is not interested in being bought, and Denmark is not interested in selling. What's the latest, Mark?
Well, Donald Trump in Davos has said that he will not use military force, at least today. That could all change, but that he would ratchet up tariffs and engage in a tariff war with Europe, Denmark in particular, but also the European countries supporting Denmark, if they did not yield and effectively give up Greenland. Of course, hanging over that is that the Supreme Court could rule any day now on President Trump's tariff authority and perhaps tell him, essentially rule that he cannot use the tariff authority under emergency powers that in security that he has been using.
This has been his threat for just about every foreign policy maneuver desire that he's had, that he'll just raise tariffs. If the Supreme Court should come back and say, no, you can't do that the way you've been doing it, does that scuttle all of his plans?
Well, I think that it's completely 100% irrelevant what the Supreme Court says, right? What other leaders have said in Davos and what we have seen in the past days, especially with Europe, is enough is enough. So the fact that they are unflinchingly just going to respond to whatever 200% tariffs on champagne and wine may happen.
Yeah, which he threatened to France if they don't get on board with his
the Board of
Peace, and we'll get to that.
But the question here is what the Europeans are going to do. And today what we heard is the president of the European Union said very clearly is we have $100 billion in tariffs ready to go. And the European Parliament did not pass the free trade agreement that was passed last year with the U.S. So it's enough. What Prime Minister from Canada said is also very clear. We're in a different ballgame, and we need to understand that we need to play in a very different field. So I think that puts President Trump in a position where he never saw any retaliation, and now that retaliation is going to start coming up, and that's a problem.
Just in terms of Greenland, what's the end game here?
It's not entirely clear. I mean, much of what President Trump is talking about in terms of security could have been quite easily obtained through a bolstering of the treaty that already allows the United States to do quite a bit militarily there. This seems more political theater in the sense that he wants to sort of show he's uber powerful and able to essentially get Europe to come on bended knee and give him Greenland as tribute, perhaps emboldened by his success in Venezuela. Right? If the extraction of Nicolas Maduro had not been so successful, maybe he would not have been so emboldened vis-a-vis Greenland. But that's where we are today. The end game, though, is that Europe isn't going to yield on this. And so I think the best the United States can hope for is some type of treaty that grants the U.S. more power, more influence in Greenland, which is what they could have achieved without all of this conflict, and potentially starting a trade war where everybody loses.
All right, let's talk about this Board of Peace. The president initially characterized it, and it was approved by the UN, as a group that would oversee Gaza as part of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. That ceasefire hasn't really held, we should point out, as more than 1,700 Palestinians have been injured or killed since it was announced. What should we anticipate seeing in Gaza, first of all?
Who knows? Nobody knows. And it's one of these things, especially when you're thinking about the new geopolitical international map, in the sense that President Trump comes with an idea, but that idea doesn't have like the steps to get that idea implemented in real life. And as you said, the ceasefire has not held, and there is still a lot of questions that we simply do not know what's going to happen. And just as a parallel is the same thing as Venezuela, right? Take out Maduro, but the regime's still there and everything's still, and there is no clear plan, only, get the oil out and that's about it. But the next week, we don't know what's going to happen.
And I want to get to Venezuela as well. There's just so many. But let's stick just for the moment with Gaza. What are the chances, Mark, that this board and the president's other ideas for establishing and maintaining peace there will work?
Relatively low. It's sort of solving Gaza, solving the Israel conflict has been something that's bedeviled of presidents for quite some time, and including many presidents with Secretary of States who are far more skilled than Marco Rubio, such as James Baker, for instance. But I don't think it's really going to resolve anything. And so I think we're likely to see a continuation of the conflict there, and probably have to wait till the next Israeli elections to see if Benjamin Netanyahu can continue as prime minister, or if by this time next year we have a new prime minister that perhaps takes a different stance intact vis-a-vis Gaza.
And I guess we should note that Netanyahu today said he would join the Board of Peace. As Trump admits, he has higher aspirations for it. As a potential UN rival. He's saying that's not beyond, that's a possibility. What else should we know about this Board of Peace at this point?
Well, that it's pay as you go, or the price tag to participate in the Board of Peace is $1 billion, and then you can have a seat at the table. So it's just one other way of extracting money. We don't know what that $1 billion would get you, and we don't know what that $1 billion will be used to, if it will stay in the Board of Peace for rebuilding Gaza, or if it will go somewhere else to the Federal Reserve. We simply do not know what that would get you.
We do know that Trump would chair it in a lifetime appointment beyond his time in office, and until he chose his own successor. Its executive board is being handpicked by Trump and includes his own son-in-law, among others close to the president. So far, some countries are agreeing to take part, others are not. And as you noted, France has been balking so far. So the president is threatening France with what he says would be 200% tariffs on wine and champagne if Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron doesn't join. What has Macron had to say so far about this?
Oh, it's very negative. And I think, as Jeronimo was mentioning, I think for Europe, this is sort of a line where they've up till now been placating Trump and trying to effectively appease him. This is one of those points where they're saying, no, enough is enough. And at the end of the day, in the sort of best case scenario for this Board of Peace, it lasts until Donald Trump leaves office in January of 2029.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. It is one thing for a sitting president to put himself in charge of an international diplomatic effort while he's in office. It's quite another to say this would be a lifetime appointment, that he could handpick his own successor. Can that be legal?
No, I can't see any success, or even say if it were J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio effectively going on with that, along with that, once Trump is no longer in office. It's a temporary thing. It's a vanity thing. But in terms of actual political importance and influence, it's pretty irrelevant, at least once Trump's term in office ends.
Practicality aside, the legality, this is, I think, probably a significant issue here, because if it's deemed an official act that he's establishing this, then it applies so long as he is president. But then the next president comes along and should be able to do what they want, or the UN, which approved the beginning of it as a means to broker peace in Gaza, should be able to do something about it. If it's not an official act, if it's something that he wants to do for the rest of his life, then he shouldn't be able to use his office to do that. Isn't that what the Supreme Court basically said? That he was immune from prosecution for official acts, not ones that aren't.
Right. But here the fact of the matter is, if any international treaty or whatnot has to go through a legislative process, that's the law of the land, and it's going to be very hard just to do it by executive order on the one hand. So let's suppose that it passes the Senate and it becomes a law of the land. Well, for country W, what happens here is completely 1,000% irrelevant, right? There is no international treaty. There is no international law. There is no body that is a international recognized organization that could say, yes, this Board of Peace is legit. Just what the UN has said and the General Assembly has said is like, okay, fine. You can start this Board of Peace as something that is going to move the ball rolling a little bit. But that's it. So if 5, 6, 7, 8 countries create that, that's going to be like the G7. It's another private club where countries get together, but whatever the G7 says or whatever this Board of Peace says is completely on the margins.
Mark, the G7 comparison is a good one. I was thinking more of like FIFA or the International Olympic Committee, these sort of self-designated bodies that seem to have a lot of power over certain things, but nobody really controlling them.
Well, yeah, I guess FIFA, though, at least does control the World Cup, and so it does have the ability to exercise influence there. They essentially own the brand, and whereas this new Board of Peace doesn't even have that going for it. More likely than not, this is just another way that people are appeasing Trump in the interim. But as his power wanes over the course of the next few years, this will fall by the wayside, and he could even lose interest in the short term, in which case by this time next year, we'll have forgotten that it exists.
According to the Financial Times, European opposition to those Greenland and Board of Peace efforts we were just talking about has led to a delay in a planned announcement of $800 billion in economic support for a post-war Ukraine, which is supposed to come from the U.S. and Europe. Could the president's moves here scuttle that entirely?
At least it could delay it. And I think one point of leverage that President Trump does have over Europe is effectively withholding the U.S. contribution for Ukraine, based on the argument that what happens in Ukraine is far more relevant for Europe than it is for the United States.
Meantime, U.S. military forces boarded and took control of another oil tanker connected with Venezuela on Tuesday. This is the seventh time that has happened since the administration sought control of Venezuela's oil after U.S. forces seized and arrested its leader, Nicolas Maduro, on narco-terrorism and drug trafficking charges. Venezuela's sort of getting lost in the shuffle in all of this, is it not, Jeronimo?
Well, 100%. And there is extreme ambiguity in terms of what's going to happen. It seems that President Trump is happy with the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, her brother, Diosdado Cabello, and everybody that was part of the unique circle of Maduro. So we don't know anything in terms of what's going to happen with Venezuela. Maria Corina Machado has given President Trump her Nobel
Peace Prize.
Peace Prize, sorry, and just attempting to get into the mix of what's going to be the future of Venezuela. But it doesn't seem that anything is going to happen in a very rapid way, or that there is a plan for a more orderly transition to a democratic Venezuela.
You mentioned her effort to hand over her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. Doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I think everybody understands that. But it's an interesting piece of the puzzle here. Norway's prime minister shared a message he received from President Trump Sunday night. Trump wrote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace." Now, Norway does not technically hand out the Nobel Peace Prize. It's decided by a committee elected by Norway's parliament. That aside, what should we take away from that little nugget revelation?
Well, it's still, I guess, it gnaws at his craw that he didn't get the Peace Prize. And so it's something that he's going to now hold against Norway for, as you mentioned, reasons that have nothing to do with the Norwegian government. I would say that was probably more of a flippant remark than anything else. I probably wouldn't take it too literally.
And I also think it's also a strategy that President Trump uses every single day. And that strategy is try to put the person that you're trying to negotiate with directly or indirectly in a bad position. So at the moment that you are sitting at the table, then he would have the upper hand. And we have seen that with Venezuela. We have seen that with potentially with Greenland, Denmark, etc., etc. So the deal is something that is going to be more advantageous for what President Trump wants to achieve.
Ultimately, do you see a clear overarching vision from President Trump about foreign policy based on both words and actions over the first year of his second term?
I mean, it's a much more aggressive foreign policy in terms of he's using the full powers of both the U.S. military as well as the U.S. economy to try to leverage the U.S. influence in the world. Does those seem to not be following a long-term plan, but it seems it's more reactive and episodic, and I think potentially undermines Republican efforts in November of 2026, as many in the MAGA base who supported President Trump precisely because he wasn't going to get involved in foreign entanglements. He was going to concentrate his energies on the United States. It could come back to haunt Republicans, perhaps not in terms of people voting for Democrats, but not turning out at the same numbers to vote for Republicans. So I think Republicans in Congress, I think, are increasingly worried that all this foreign activity is sending a message to Americans that President Trump's more concerned with foreign policy than with domestic policy.
Yeah, what do you think, Jeronimo? It does seem as if this is, to a degree, standing in stark contrast to what many of Trump's supporters once assumed America first actually meant.
Well, absolutely. The argument that the president is making is that all these efforts are for America first, to achieve the goals of the American first policy. And for example, it's the argument that now the U.S. is going to have these huge access to Venezuelan oil. But that's not going to be translated tomorrow or in 1 year or 2 years. What we have heard from oil experts is that this thing could take 10 years to get the ball rolling. The same thing as bringing manufacturing jobs, something that has not been significantly achieved, right? So we are in a very odd time, very similar to the last year and a half of the Biden presidency. The macroeconomy was doing great. The Wall Street was going up like crazy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But let's call it the microeconomy, the kitchen table economy is not doing so rosy. And that's what people are going to be, thinking about. And what Mark said is, you told me that when I go to the supermarket, I can buy cereal that my kid likes. And now you are spending, I don't know how much money on Greenland. I don't care about Greenland. I don't eat stocks or anything like that. I eat cereal, and that's not going to be materialized. And it's a very vivid experience that people experience every single day.
Mark, if this sort of approach continues over the course of the year, I mean, do you see this as being what may lead to a change in the power structure in Congress? And could it be that President Trump's foreign policy pursuits are ultimately going to ruin his chances of getting anything done congressionally or anything done, period, if Democrats happen to get control of at least one house of Congress in November?
Well, they definitely are going to contribute to that, and it's a combination of the economy and people's, as Jeronimo has mentioned, their sort of personal economic pocketbook issues, and then a perception that President Trump is not concerned with the economy in the way that he said he was going to be concerned. Right now, I think the most likely scenario is that Democrats are going to take control of the U.S. House. The question is by what margin. But if things get much worse, they could also take control of the Senate. that the Republicans have a nice structural advantage there simply because of who's up for re-election, but it's not a lock. And the worse things get nationally and the more people get unhappy with President Trump and his approval ratings fall, the more the Senate could become vulnerable. And as you mentioned, that means that during the final 2 years of his tenure in office, he's going to have a difficult time, if not impossible, passing any legislation without Democratic support, which is not likely to be there.
Do you think any of this could impact even the primary season and what we see here in Houston in March?
Well, I mean, it could have a significant effect. I mean, we're seeing that some conservative Republicans are trying to be outflanked on the right that have a very serious and very stable conservative record in terms of pursuing fiscal policy, being conservative in social issues, etc., and are being outflanked. So that could have an impact in some primaries, but overall, I think that the support, or at least some of the support of the MAGA movement, can put them ready for the general election, and in the general election is where things can go a little bit wrong for these Republicans. But especially here, when we're thinking about Texas, we had redistricting, and some of these districts may go the way that it was planned or may go the other way. And once again, like Mark said, it's going to be the economy that is going to determine much of these outcomes.
Mark, speaking of elections, some campaign finance reports have come out in recent days. What can you share, and what do they tell us?
Well, one is that Governor Abbott's in a pretty comfortable position. He has $105 million cash on hand. His most likely rival on the Democratic side, Gina Hinojosa, has $700,000, about 100 times less, more than 100 times less. And then same for Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. He has $38 million cash on hand. His most likely rival, State Representative Vicki Goodwin, is at about $200,000. I think the two races where we're going to see the most money spent outside of the Senate race, and we'll have those numbers at the end of the month because they're federal, are the controller's race, where we see Don Huffines spending a good part of his considerable fortune. He's spent $4 million thus far. He has $12 million on hand. And then you have Kelly Hancock, who has the support of the governor, who spent $1 million but has $7 million on hand. And then the attorney general's race, and that's a very important position. We've seen Ken Paxton use it very effectively, and Greg Abbott use it very effectively. They are the two main candidates, or Chip Roy, the congressman, who's spent relatively little, only about $1 million, with $4 million cash on hand, and Mays Middleton, a state senator who has independent wealth from his oil company, or his family's oil company. He spent $7 million thus far, with $5 million on hand. His goal is to force Roy into a May runoff. The other two candidates there, Aaron Reitz, not Reitz, like Ken Reitz, the baseball hero, it has only about $3 million on hand, and absent Donald Trump's endorsement, is unlikely to have much success. And Joan Huffman, a state senator from here in Houston, has raised very little money and spent very little.
Jeronimo, early voting is underway starting today in the Texas 18th congressional runoff between former Harris County Attorney Christian Menefee and former Houston City Council member Amanda Edwards. Early voting will continue until the 27th. Election day is the 31st. Considering this is a runoff for a special election, and we now have some bad weather coming this weekend into Monday, what are you anticipating in terms of turnout?
Well, I mean, it's going to be, it's the runoff of also a low, I would say, information election, in the sense that not a lot of people understand outside of Congressional District 18. But it could get a lot of traction. Why? Because that position has been vacant since Mayor Sylvester Turner passed away, and a lot of people in the district are not happy. So I think that could potentially have it, perhaps not during this weekend, but I would say that turnout is going to be as we would expect with one of these races in another time.
Jeronimo Cortina is the co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. You can catch it Friday nights at 7:30 on News 88.7, Friday nights at 8 on Houston Public Media TV 8. It's available on YouTube as well and wherever you get your podcasts. He's also a political science professor at the University of Houston. Mark Jones is a political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Jeronimo, Mark, thank you both.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.